Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a sunny day, also blustery again, as it has been for the past about week here. You know, we're pretty near the ocean, and so we get the western wind. I've got my wind buffer on my mic, and it's decent. It's pretty good. But it would be better if it were fatter. It's a little bit thin, so some of the wind noise is probably going to come through. Now, I want to talk about some things that have been within my mind since they were introduced to me in 2002. So, you know, that's 23 years ago now. A lifetime for a 23-year-old, and more than a lifetime for anyone younger than that. In common parlance, or ways of speaking. And, you know, over the past few days, I've been playing with this toy that I was shown that I call the Dandelion. If you look at a cutaway of the sun, which we must imagine is a primordial example of the nature of space-time, and also that which produces space-time, because it's very clear to me that the physical layer, which is what we refer to as space-time, the universe, is not primordial, right? It's not, there's a word I'm looking for. It'll come to me. It's not what's going on, right? It's like a layer. And I usually think of it in a sphere, but it's actually not a sphere. It's something weirder than a tesseract. And it's not merely a mathematical construct either. Rather than being, 3, 4, 7-dimensional, it's n-dimensional. Its dimensionality varies according to the perspective from which it's being inquired into or interacted with. And there's mostly nothing that isn't like this. If you look at a tree and you're trying to understand the nature of the universe, as expressed in the tree, you will not see what humans think, right? You will not see, oh, it's a plant. You will not see the ordinary categories that we use as maps in representational cognition, which primarily is concerned with producing tokens to point at features of experience that can be distinguished conceptually and lexically. If you had a lamp that was turning on and off in a certain way, say on for a second, off for a second, on for half a second, off for a second, on for a quarter second, off for half a second, on for an eighth of a second, off for a quarter second, and so on. And you can actually increase the amount of time it's off and shrink the amount of time it's on, right? So that instead of it being on half the time, which the model I just made has that quality, it could be on for an ever shrinking amount of time. So in one iteration, half; in the next iteration, a quarter of the time it's on; in the next iteration, an eighth; in the next iteration, a 16th, and so on. If the lamp is flashing quickly enough, which it would be doing in this model, you quickly get to a situation which is demonstrable with any strobe light, right? Just turn up the frequency, where you cannot tell it's ever off, even if it's off 90% of the time. And this is because of a feature of visual experience called the persistence of vision. This is referred to with refresh rate in screen technologies, or at least it used to be. I'm not sure what the modern tech is like. So similarly, if you got 1 million pixels and you just light one of them at a time in horizontal lines, but you could light them in randomly too. It's just easier to keep track if you do it linearly. So if you had, 1 million pixels and only one pixel is ever lit, and you're lighting them in a sequence of some kind over fractions of a second, the entire screen, all of the pixels will appear to be lit. You should be able to understand this fairly easily. Many of our technologies work this way. They're not continuous, right? They're optimized for turning frequency into the appearance of continuity. And what I'm going to suggest is that this is actually what's going on in reality. Most of the time, nothing is here. Maybe as much as 99.9% of the time, the physical universe isn't there. Now, this is a toy. In the classical Greek sense, it's a Theoria. It's a way of seeing. It's not meant to be true or not true. It's meant to provide insight into possibility spaces that are excluded by the way that we usually think. In the Dandelion Toy, time-space is a membrane at the edge of a sphere. Now, again, it's not actually a sphere. I'm just using it because that's a familiar 3D geometric shape. And the sphere, like a cutaway of the sun or the earth, is layered. And each of the layers is a different reality, except it's not actually a reality. It's a phase state of, I'll get to that. So, at the core of the sphere is what I'm going to call, and you could put it on, you could invert it, right? So that physical reality is the core and the origin is the outside. Doesn't really matter. But we're going to stay with a more familiar perspective to us, so we'll go from inside to outside. At the core of the sphere is something that is not merely impossible. It's hypergenerative. It's like impossibility with an asterisk. It's the trans impossible, right? It's more than merely impossible. And this is just one way of seeing it. You could call it origin, you could call it God's mind, you could call it anything you like. So at the core of the cutaway is a little sphere, or, a big sphere, it doesn't matter. And that sphere is origin. At least something is actually producing this thing, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but it's not entirely relevant. So at the core you have impossibility, unity, singularity, and that's not a static thing. That's a hyperdynamic, multi-dynamic. It's not a thing at all. We don't have any language for what that is. And then at the next layer of the concentric sphere, you have the impossible, that which cannot be. And at the next layer, out, right? These are concentric spheres, like a cutaway. You have the possible, and at the next layer, the probable, and at the next layer, the semi-deterministic, and at the next layer, the mostly deterministic, and then at the outer layer, you have the physical. Now, the physical has qualities of all those other layers. They're just invisible to us because of how the thing is refreshing. And what I'm suggesting is going on is that the sphere collapses to unity, one being, one mind, except it's one with an asterisk. It's not, it's not singular in the sense that we usually think. And then, so everything, all beings, minds, moments, situations, particles, light, everything, collapses to unity. And then expands back to the appearance of distinct beings and situations, places and times and so forth. Ever faster each impossibly tiny fraction of a second. And this has been going on since the, quote, beginning of the universe. In this model, the beginning of the universe is now, and so is the end. But this is hard to explain to humans who think linearly. So this dandelion toy, which I've sketched, right? We live at the outer layer. We're not trapped there, but the outer layer is very sticky to consciousness, right? The physical layer. And so most of the time, the physical layer is either collapsing to unity or expanding from unity into distinction. And it's not doing that in a single phase state per moment. It's doing that in all of the phase states per moment, right? So there's every branch from the physical layer to the core is unique. And they're collapsing at a rate that is shared, but they're also collapsing at a rate that is private. So this model is hard to understand, and I'm working on making it simpler. In this model, the off state of the flashing lamp represents the collapse to unity, and the on state, which gives you the persistence, the continuity that you experience at the physical layer, is correlated with the on state of a flashing lamp. Right? So collapse, expand, collapse, expand. And it's strobing at some frequency, but the frequency is unimaginably high. And in this model, this toy, all beings are the same being. At the physical layer, this doesn't look true to consciousness, depending on how consciousness is oriented. There are orientations of awareness and consciousness that immediately open the entire dandelion to awareness. This is usually called enlightenment. And in fact, in those modes of awareness, that mind has become the dandelion. And this is why you hear excuse me, in Enlightenment traditions, this peculiar word emptiness, right? Which never means nothing. It does mean no thingness, but it's something like transcendental, pure, undifferentiated potential. Or at least, that's one way of framing it in language. You could also frame it as the mind of origin, which is beyond even the mind of God. This is something so primordial that it could be understood as being beyond all distinctions. And you are, in fact, the entire dandelion. All of its phase states, all of its moments, all of its histories, all of its components, which it doesn't actually have any except at the physical layer. However, it can be understood to have different kinds of components at the other layers, and there are mind-like, transcendentally mind-like, features of the different concentric circles within the dandelion, the impossibility space, the possibility space, the probability space. Right? There are beings that dwell non-physically in those spaces, and they generate, they progenerate the effects at the physical layer, such as organisms and humans and minds and things, and all of their relationships. But last night it occurred to me something. I've always thought, I had this sort of strange metaphysical intuition that there's some kind of a being which is perfectly motionless relative to all other beings. And long ago, when I first had this peculiar intuition, I thought, this is what an angel is. That motionlessness, that stillness, is also associated with enlightenment, not accidentally. And yesterday it occurred to me that both light and gravity, which in human physical science appear to have the same rate of propagation to all observers. Light's is c, which is not the speed of light. It's not even really that light is traveling. It's the rate of propagation over manifolds. And gravity has a similar rate of propagation. And apparently inside the nucleus of an atom, quarks and such are moving around in there at c, which is weird. So it finally occurred to me last night that what light is doing is not moving. Right? Light is the spirit of the dandelion's activity, which is perfect stillness in relation to all other phenomena. And this produces the apparent physical fact of the speed, quote unquote, of light and gravity. Now, gravity could be understood within this toy as the memory along the routes of collapse and expansion of its previous phases and the process itself. Now, this is very heady stuff. You might need to listen to this 5 or 6 times to begin to get the flavor of it if it's not immediately apparent to you. And this intuition of mine, that there's something that isn't moving at all relative to all other apparent distinct beings and situations and processes and so forth, that is fundamental. That's the word I was using. Time-space is not looking for it. Time-space is not fundamental. Earlier. So, this is extremely profound. It is accessible to human interiority to touch the basis of this. And I imagine that there must be humans throughout time who either permanently disappeared into the other layers of the dandelion, they physically disappeared from the physical layer, or and they dwell in the dandelion, and this could be where death actually is, right? That's where we go when we die. Some feature of that is almost certain, but so there must be not just humans, but other beings that were there one moment, they disappeared the next they appeared possibly somewhere else later or previously. They multi-appeared, right? So that, imagine, yeah, I mean, this construct opens up a really science fiction-y situation where, for example, someone disappears from a specific location in time, and they place and relation, and they multi-appear in others, right? So you don't know, there's no way for you to know that the you that is here now is the only you. It's the only you you're aware of, but your awareness is largely inhibited by a bunch of constructs that are as nonsensical as they are compelling. So you could, right, what if past lives aren't past? What if your actual incarnation is throughout the history and future of the dandelion, and your point of presence here now is just one among an incarnation landscape that is as vast as time and space is, right? You have presently as many incarnations as there are stars in the universe. You're just not aware of them. And we have this idea of past lives, which isn't uninteresting. I don't want to dismiss it entirely. But is probably not really what's going on, because what's going on isn't just weirder than you think, it's weirder than you can think. And so even this model, this toy, the dandelion, it's a model that gives you access to things that you would otherwise never have access to if you learn to use it, right? If you learn to employ the model in thinking about nature, identity, origin, light, time, minds, so forth. So yeah, I think perhaps light is standing still. Light is that which doesn't move relative to all other things. And the speed of light has to do with the rate of the collapse and expansion of the dandelion. It's a figment, right? And similarly, gravity and probably some other things. Consciousness is very strange stuff. Intelligence is very strange stuff. And beyond them is a feature I call transsentience, which is awareness within the body of the dandelion rather than at a specific position. Now most physical things have a very similar structure to this dandelion, right? They've got like some kind of a core, the earth and the moon and the sun, for example. And then there are layered, concentric layered structures within even the sun, which it's hard to say the sun is a physical object. Right? It's transcendental to ordinary physical objects by a long shot. And it produces organisms as a side effect of what it's up to. So all of this is fascinating to me, but this insight about light and gravity being stillness within the dandelion is new. And I was so shocked when it came to me last night. What was I doing? I was reading a physics book by Strassler, Waves on an Invisible Sea, which I'm about halfway through. And it suddenly occurred to me that stillness might be transcendental, a certain kind of stillness in relation to all other phenomena. Now, interestingly, the living beings that we call trees and plants, they don't move. Their movement is what we call their growth, but they are still, right, in place, not still in time. They never go somewhere else, although those are network beings, right? So their awareness probably exists at least similarly in the network of all plants, all trees, all organisms, and so forth. And then the localization is an expression of that distribution over locality and incarnation. So this was mind-blowing. Now the other thing there's a couple of other things I want to get at here. One of them is, I've heard humans trying to explain, quote, what the universe is. And it's often interesting to watch them fumble about with this stuff. But generally, the orientation of their curiosity is typically mundane. Right? So you hear noises like, the universe is a simulation. Really? I mean, I could just as easily say the universe is a shoe. It's a pig. The universe is a piece of silverware. This is one of the most nonsensical ideas I've ever heard. First of all, if it were a simulation, then the mind, unless your mind is not the simulation, you have zero chance of ascertaining that ontologically or epistemologically or experimentally. No chance. And then the second problem is, if it's a, quote, simulation, unquote, what the fuck is it simulating? Right? Simulations aren't just things that sit there simulating. Simulations are invariably simulations of something. You have the same problem if you say the universe is a hologram. These are simplistic and dumb. Like, they make you dumber when you play with them, ideas. Whereas the dandelion will not make you dumber if you play with it. So yeah, there's no chance that the universe is a simulation. But what's going on, at least from the perspective of the Dandelion Toy, is that the physical layer is, in a way, a projection of features, qualities, histories, and futures of the other layers. Also of the character of the other layers. Right? When you see a tiger, you're seeing the spirit of the dandelion. When you see an octopus, the spirit of the dandelion. A star, a human being, a mind, a forest, the mountain, the river, the lake, the desert, the ocean, the praying mantis, the bee. Right? These are the faces of expressions of the character, history, future, and relationships within this dandelion. And they're not merely projected. What's actually going on, there are no human lexicals for these things, right? This is from outside human thought, concept, and knowledge. I can collapse it into language and concepts by using toys, right? But what's actually going on is transcendental to your possibilities of encoding in language. Mine too. That's why I call it a toy. Yeah, and there's no chance that the universe is a simulation, but it is a kind of projection. And how you orient consciousness, awareness, and your intelligence in the physical layer will change what you see by changing how you approach it and the kinds of derivations you're likely to make based on your purposes and motivations. And this is why human knowledge is implicitly untrustworthy. It's trustworthy within the layer. So there's another layer to the dandelion which the humans make, and probably other organisms do something similar. It's the representational layer. Right, that's the layer where our concepts and lexicons and language acquire tool-like properties in representational thought, which is something that you have to depart from intimacy and relation to do it all. Right, the moment you start thinking about what is a kiss while you're kissing, you're no longer kissing. Right? Now you've split in awareness. And this splitting thing turns out to be that is fundamental to most of human thought, awareness, and consciousness. We split in awareness and consciousness into multiple kinds of observers, interrogators, declarers, and so forth. And that splitting, if we were aware of it, we would unsplit, because from an unsplit position, you have basically infinite degrees of freedom, and you can multiply inhabit them instead of singularly inhabiting one against all the others, which is what the humans like to do, unfortunately, for everything that exists. So yeah, the splitting thing, watch yourself in a conversation and you'll notice if someone asks you a question or makes a declaration, you will immediately split into an evaluative aspect, and various kinds of charges will arise in your body and your awareness. Even if they say something really beautiful, right, you might split toward intimacy. Or you might collapse the splitting into intimacy, which resembles the other phases of the dandelion, right? Communion, the mind of God, the divine, origin, so forth. So yeah, the splitting thing is fundamental to being human and fascinating to observe in oneself. I remember when I first discovered I was doing this, I was completely blown away. I was like, holy shit, I've been doing this my entire life and was unaware of it. I split when someone, I'm doing it now, right? It's in order, I'm making declarations, right? So I'm splitting into, I have like Darren's interior, and then I have what in transactional analysis would be called my little professor, which I'm embodying right now. I'm splitting into my little professor to make this lecture. So yeah, the universe is not a simulation, and even if it were, it would have to be a simulation of something composed by someone for some purpose. Now, it's not that it has no similar features. It does. It has similar features to a hologram as well. But a hologram, like a simulation, is a hologram of something. And you could say, well, it's a hologram of a transcendental object at the end of time. Right? Well, that'd be very Terence McKenna-y. And, could be useful to play with, but that's not what's going on. Both of those features, holography and simulations, have qualities that are derived from what's actually going on, but you can't collapse what's going on into those derivatives. Yeah, no chance. It's important to remember that, quote, what's going on is never what humans are thinking is going on. Thinking is going on in humans, right? But that's not what's going on. Human thought, mostly, exceptions noted, is a kind of self-sustaining prison protocol for the mind. Again, exceptions noted. Poetry and song and music and dance and art and all of these things, these are deprisoning aspects of human behavior, which also have some of the prison woven into them, so to speak. So yeah, this was blowing my mind. And there was another thing. Let's see, what was the last little piece I wanted to add? I will expand this, and I'm happy to answer questions and stuff if anyone has them. Just post them, in the video's comments. And I also have an essay on the dandelion, which I hope to write a much simpler version of that's more easily grasped. If you just search organelle.medium.com, or if you just look dandelion in Medium, you'll probably see my essay there. And that toy links to other toys that I've proposed, particularly the two called Godspec and the one called the hand toy, which I'll leave alone here for the moment. Now, where was I going? Okay. Light is stillness. The universe isn't a simulation. This also really kind of explains wave function collapse in a way. There's no collapse. What's happening is the humans have sort of discovered the dandelion space just prior to the layer of physical reality with their representational layer. And they're confused by this because it doesn't really make sense. But wave function collapse has to do with positional. It has to do with perspective positionally within the dandelion. And if you locate the perspective at one layer below the physical, you get what looks like quantum stuff. And, it's not surprising that no one's linked that layer to the physical directly, because the link... Yeah, I can't say it. I have to not say this. Yeah, I'll keep that to myself for the moment. There's some things that shouldn't be revealed. But yeah, the quantum is really just the awareness of the sphere just prior in the expansion phase to the physical layer. And consciousness is throughout, There are things that aren't just consciousness. There are things that make consciousness look trivial. But consciousness as we mean it is the presence in the physical layer of the character and identity of the dandelion. Right? as if there were an invisible star. Yeah? An invisible star whose light forges minds. And hearts. I think I'll pause for the moment, see if I can recover the third topic, the third secret. Your brain is not the source of consciousness. It's more like a complex array of linked up transceivers. And it's really important to understand that, like the dandelion, without your organs, your brain doesn't exist, right? No gut, no brain. No liver, no brain. No kidneys, no brain, on and on and on. The brain is sort of like a representation, in a sense. It could be thought of as a representation that's similar to the physical layer of the dandelion, which is producing all phenomena now. You think, no, I was born in 1970, whatever. No, you're being born right now. You're also dying right now. Your death and your birth are both right here. They're not merely in some distant spatio-temporal coordinate system. Everything that is produced instantaneously now. This is why you hear wisdom traditions talking in effusive terms about the present moment. Your awareness has the capacity to sense, not just to sense these matters, but to become them directly. To be subtracted from personal identity, the representational layer of human cognition, things, beings, and circumstances, comparisons, evaluations, measuring systems, equivalence, protocols, and all of this stuff. That whole thing can just disappear, and your mind can become, not merely see or sense or know, it can become the absence of them, much like the stillness of light in the dandelion. And this, I think, is what in quote-unquote enlightenment is usually or commonly used to point at. So when I say like your personal identity is nonsense, this is what I'm getting at. The idea that you are your personal identity resembles the idea that the tip of the fingernail of your pinky is you. It's your body. It's not just your body, it's your relationships too. It's everything. You can wander around in that kind of a cloud, and most of us will throughout our lives. That's not what's going on. And what's going on, like, all of the human thoughts about what's impossible are nonsense, because what's going on is the spirit of impossibility exploring and expanding, diversifying, and modulating its, infinite potentials as beings, right? As entities, as stones, as atmosphere, the moon, all of the features of our experience. So what's going on, what everything is up to is pure impossibility. And our thinking has nothing to do with that. It's a way of resisting enlightenment, right? Or insight. Insight is a kind of, can be understood, and in some cases is, a sort of mini enlightenment that's not as threatening as if you collapse the whole damn thing all at once. Which is probably what the term satori refers to. These are some of my thoughts at the moment. I'm going to pause here and enjoy the beauty of this amazing living world. And I may return with further thoughts, so I won't end the recording with my usual postscript yet. Organismal development. In mammals, the sperm hits the egg. This results in pluripotent cells. The division into what we call the vegetal pole and the animal pole without any actual reference to plants or animals. And then, the sequential consequences of the fertilization of an egg. And if you watch that process unfold, what you're going to see is not a representation, but the physicalization of the phases of the dandelion itself. And if you look anywhere in nature, you're going to see the same thing. This is a toy of all toys. There are no toys that I know of that are superior to this one in terms of understanding what we experience here at the physical layer and participating with it. Because when you participate with your heart instead of your thinking, right, you're literally moving your awareness from the representational layer into the physical layer, which is more true, trustworthy, and intimate, and even into layers beneath that. And each layer beneath that is more profoundly, quote, true, unquote, not in the sense of a statement being true, in the sense of the living spirit of infinite truth that is being. Right? So yeah, take a look at your eye. Each physical structure is a unique way of implementing the same principle. The branching plants from their root, right, implement this principle. The root is in the ground. The ground represents unity, right? That's the core of the dandelion. And the branchings represent the patterns, the unique local, sort of personal to each plant, patterns of collapse and expansion over dandelion time and over, time in our layer, linear time. Right? And those branchings select for intimacy, right? Not thinking. It's not a model. They select for intimacy, which is sort of the flavor of truth. You could imagine a tree, where you are the leaf, you are one leaf on the tree, inside the dandelion's histories of collapse and expansion. And the tree represents your near neighbors in the tree-like structures that exist within the dandelion between unity and the physical layer. And you don't see tree branches in your eye structure, but what you do see are very complex structures of color in the iris, right? And then also unity in the pupil, which is what you actually see with, right? Though you need the whole dang thing. The pupil by itself doesn't work. And the structure of the eye, as we've come to understand it through dissection, is an exemplar of the nature of the dandelion. There are no phenomena that are not thus. This is an ontic superposition, right? This is an ontological superposition. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that the dandelion is what's going on. What I'm trying to say is that humans make toys that they use, little maps and models and concepts and words and things. And then so they forge toys, and then they go around in the phenomenal world and say things like, well, this is equivalent to this toy. Right? But yet they haven't the slightest idea what anything is, and they never will get that. Although you can approach it. The reason they'll never get it is that it's a direction, not a destination, and that direction is infinitely dimensional and layered, right? So you're never going to capture the whole thing. Your only actual hope of insight is to become it in awareness, right? In relation, in behavior, in consciousness. You know, you hear these stories from particularly Zen people, but also people in, what you call it, traditions where moksha is the goal, right? Achieving the mind of God. You hear these stories where someone will say something like, it will be as if you snatched the sword of General Quan and your 8-legged thunder horse carries you to supremacy over all phenomena, right? The mountain will tremble. And this is a way of speaking about what happens when you become not just the body of the dandelion, but the point of presence that produces it. Supernatural phenomena, and by the way, there are, you can have one of two perspectives, right? I mean, feel free to be nuanced and have 6, please do. But ordinarily people have one of two perspectives. Either there's nothing supernatural, that's all a bunch of delusion and nonsense, or there's nothing supernatural because everything that is nature. Both of those positions are wildly incomplete in dangerous ways. But in point of fact, what I'm saying is kind of the opposite. There's a thing beyond supernatural, and nothing isn't that. That's what I'm getting at here. There are no mundane phenomena, because what's producing phenomena and the actual physical structure of organisms and such is transcendental to anything that anyone is capable of thinking. There's no chance of you thinking it. Though it is possible to form toys like the dandelion that give you a better purchase on, quote, what's going on, unquote, than the toys the ordinary humans make. And this toy comes from direct experience, right? But the behaviors of humans or situations that we think are supernatural, those are merely situations in which more of the layers of the dandelion are localizing in a person or place or situation here. So if you want to know, like, what are UFOs? That's what UFOs are. What are ghosts? That's what ghosts are. What is telepathy? That's what telepathy is. What is touch healing? That. What is bilocation? That. Astral travel? That. Except I should say them, because it's not a thing. And it's not even a being. It's a category we don't really have a good lexical feature for it in the catalog. I use the word origin to point toward this. But what I mean by that is like 19 billion kinds of different transnuclear explosions of infinite potential and dimension at once. It's not a stable, origin doesn't refer to a thing or a being. It refers to something so shocking that were you to get a glimpse of it, you'd perish of ecstasy. Just a glimpse would destroy you, unless it were very carefully buffered. I'll pause here, continue, see what happens. You know, there are other phenomena that you can directly observe visually and auditorially with any of your senses in nature. Right? That food that's so amazing that you just want more of it, that's well, there's two kinds, right? There's the representational kind, like the nacho cheese Doritos, right, which contain cravenol, the key ingredient to make you want more. Or, you know, you go to some farmhouse in France where there's no pesticides and everything's organic, and they raised all the food there in that town, and you're eating the food of the place where you are instead of food that was shipped and refrigerated and treated and processed and so forth. That stuff's closer to origin, and so when you eat it, it's not really the same thing as the other food. Same category, different thing, right? And humans are the same way. They all belong to the category. There's no chance of that telling you what they are or who they are. Category just tells you something about the form is commensurate with the model. This is why I've said abnormality is normality. There are no normal humans. Normality is a general derivation over a possibility space, that there's no chance of anyone or anything matching that. You can get closer with things that appear physically identical. For example, forks of the class of forks that come from the same manufacturer as my favorite forks that I use. But what you will never find is two forks occupying the same space with exactly the same qualities. It's impossible, right? It's impossible because the dandelion isn't that way. There are no single things. There are zero identical things. None. Those are fictions of convenience in language and representational thought. And they're deceptive as all get out. Somebody just walked right into my personal space and is completely oblivious to the fact that other humans are here or have personal space. And it was kind of triggering. I started to split, right, into my, started to split toward my war mind. Right? Hey, buddy, what are you doing? Whatever. But then I noticed the splitting and cooled off. We are inclined to think that memory is in our brains. And the portion of that supposition that's true isn't entirely trivial, but memory is not in your brain. Memory is in the dandelion, right? And your brain interacts with the dandelion in such a way as to give you the impression. See, this is the problem with the container metaphor in English. I have a disease, right? I have an injury. I have a memory, I have a thought in my brain. I have a thought in my mind, right? It poses your mind as a container. And again, you know, the very crude toys that we're given or scripted with, or that are, you know, impressed on us during the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation, which go on throughout our lives but are particularly trenchant in childhood, where the possibility space of your intelligence as a child is catastrophically transfinite and nothing like normal. And then the humans, through a series of conceptual, linguistic, behavioral, relational, social, ideological amputations, produce a human that is, quote, you know, the attempt is to produce a human that's well adjusted to the representational layer of human thought, behavior, activity, and the layer of commerce, right? The main thing many parents are concerned about is, can my kid make money? Tragic. Yeah, so memory is not in your mind, and the one of you that has a disease or an injury, this is a little bit dangerous here. I fully acknowledge the agonies of being injured or uniquely abled, or, you know, in pain or suffering. And I don't want to say that that's irreal. That, for example, it's just in your mind or something. There might be some edge cases where the primary feature of the problem is in how the mind is situated in relation to the body or situations. There are probably some situations, some edge cases, where most of the problem is in the mind. And probably all physical situations, the mind is involved, right? To varying degrees in injury and healing. Allopathic medicine is real, but it's got a grasp on no more than a tenth of the situation and treats it mechanically in most cases. Different doctors are different about this. But what I'm getting at is that, you know, a facet of you can know that it has an injury or a disease, and another facet cannot know that, and another facet cannot have that injury or disease. Or be subject to, right? So where is the actual you? Is the actual you the one with the injury, or, you know, the dis-ease and the awareness of it? Or is the actual you the one that is transcendental to any simple state? And I would argue that both things are differently true from different perspectives. A body is the dandelion relating with itself, and a mind is a feature of that that is susceptible to being structured in such a way that it certainly is trenchant on awareness that I am sick or injured. But what is the resolution of that? Is it in the body? Is it in the mind? Is it in both? Is it in a third thing we don't have a word for? Well, it's all of them, uniquely in each moment and situation. So it's very complex, but you don't possess an injury, right? In a way, it's kind of the other way around. We are possessed by our injuries. This is a very complex topic, which I'm not trying to cover. in great depth. This is a topic for another time. I'm so grateful for all of the beings who have contributed and are contributing in this moment to my existence and my capacities for awareness, physical existence. I love being a living human, and I love humans. I'm not a fan of the extremely lethal and disorganized behavior of humans at scale, but individual humans and small groups of them can be absolutely, brilliantly amazing. And we are important, but not in the way we usually think. We're not superior to anything because without everything, we're not here. A simple example is take away the sun. What do you got? Nada around here. No thoughts, language, math, religion, politics, war, nothing. No liberation, no prison, nothing. I hope that you'll take this toy very seriously and chase it. When I see dogs chasing balls, I think of my own life within the dandelion. The human is, for the dog, in a sense, a god, and its own body, right? The human is the extended body of the dog to whom this bond is mutual. It's very profound. Similarly, but differently, cats, and similarly, but differently, plants, or any animal with which we bond in deep, intimate symbiosis and love. So I'm so grateful to have this time to explore and unforget, to anamnese together, which isn't like sneezing.
Maybe when you're like down on this side, the west end, and we want to head back for the hotel, we could like do
You know, I love uniquely minded people, and most of my close friends are very uniquely minded. Various labels could be applied to them and me, but the label is not what's interesting. What's interesting is their spirit, their heart, the urgency of their desire for beauty and justice, which really is the absence of injustice, right? It's the rectification of something that really shouldn't be that way. Yeah, I'm so grateful for this time together, for your attention, for your sense of wonder, your curiosity, your playful creativity, and I wish you every beautiful way. May we together find a way to fulfill the promise implicit in our human incarnation in this lifetime and all others. All blessings to you and those you love, those who love you, those who love them, the living places and plants and animals and insects and fishes and so forth where you are. Thank you for joining me. Take a moment to sign in and like or comment or ask a question or, render a very severe criticism if you happen to have one. Tickle the algorithm. Or if you like, buy me a coffee or make a one-time donation, whatever feels right. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.